Last time we discussed about how to graph sine and cosine functions. This time we're going to do the exact opposite. In this particular tutorial, the graph of the sine and cosine functions are already given. All we have to do is to determine the amplitude, frequency, and period of each of the following graph of sine and cosine functions and determine its equation. Now let's consider the graph of problem number 1 here. If we are to recall the pattern in graphing sine function, we actually have e me. So let's consider the intercept here. From the point of origin, let's denote it as I. Then we have the highest point here, the maximum point. Let's denote it as capital letter M. Then we have here the point here, which is the intercept I. Then from this point, we actually have the minimum point denoted by small letter m. And from this point, we actually have the intercept I. If we are to recall the pattern in the graph of sine function, we actually have e me. The intercept I, the maximum point capital M, the intercept I, the small letter m, which is the minimum point, and the small letter I, which is the intercept. This pattern actually gives us a function to be y is equal to a sine bx. If not, y is equal to a sine bx. Okay, so this is simply the graph of the sine function. Now let's determine the amplitude A. The amplitude A is simply the highest point or the minimum point actually 2 and negative 2, or the y ordinates 2 and negative 2. So actually the amplitude is simply 2. Okay? Since the maximum point and minimum point can be determined by the value of the amplitude. Now, how are we going to determine the frequency? The first thing we have to do here is to recall the equation for the period t. Let's recall, t is simply equal to 360 degrees all over B. If we are to get B, this is simply equal to 360 degrees. If not, 360 degrees divided by T, the period T. The period T is simply one cycle of the graph. If we are to determine one cycle of the graph, which is T, so from this point to this point, we actually have this 90 degrees. Take note, the period T is simply 90 degrees. So let's have 90 degrees. 360 degrees divided by 90 degrees. So B is simply equal to 4. Okay, so we already determined the frequency. The frequency is simply equal to 4, and take note, the period T is actually equal to 90 degrees. Okay, so take note of the answers. The amplitude is 2, the frequency B is 4, the period t is 90 degrees. So from here, we can be able to write the equation. Y is equal to a sine bx. So let's just substitute the value of a, which is 2, and we have sine bx. The value of b is 4. So that's it. We have the equation y is equal to 2 sine 4x. So take note of that. Alright, let's continue. Determine the amplitude, frequency, and period of each of the following graph of sine and cosine functions and determine its equation. The first thing we have to do here is to determine the 5 key points of one cycle of the given graph. Okay, let's start from the point of origin. Okay, so this is the point of origin. If we are to consider this point here, this is simply the maximum point. If we are to consider this point here, this is simply the intercept. And also, this point here is simply the minimum point. This point here is the intercept. And we have here this point, which is the maximum point. If we are to recall the patterns in graphing cosine function, we actually have this pattern, okay, which is simply mimim. Capital letter M is the maximum point, I is the intercept, small letter m is the minimum point, then I is the intercept, and then we have the capital letter M, which is the maximum point, which is simply the graph of y equals a cosine bx. So this given graph here is actually the graph of a cosine functions. So let's determine the amplitude. The amplitude A is simply the ordinate of the y-axis. So this is actually our y-axis. So as you can see, we have here 5/2. A is simply equal to 5/2. The amplitude is 5/2. So take note, we have here 5/2. Then we have to determine the frequency. But the first thing we have to do here is to determine the period t. Okay? The period t is simply one cycle of the given graph. So from the point of origin up to this particular point, we actually have 180 degrees as one cycle of the graph. So t is simply 180 degrees. So take note of that. Now let's recall how to compute for the period t. T is simply equal to 360 degrees, okay, all over your frequency b. So from here, we can be able to solve for the frequency b, which is equal to 360 degrees divided by the period t. Okay, so take note of that. So let's solve. B is simply equal to 360 degrees, okay, divided by what is our period t? Is simply 180 degrees. So B is just equal to 360 divided by 180 is simply equal to 2. Since 2 times 180 is 360. So from here, we can be able to write the given equation of this given graph. Y is simply equal to a cosine bx. So just substitute the value of a here, which is 5 over 2. Then cosine of dx. b is 2, so we have here cosine 2x. So take note, the given equation of this graph, y equals 5 over 2 cosine 2x. Again, I would like to thank you for watching Doc Gilmac Math TV. Stand by for my next tutorial. Stay safe, everyone, and may God bless us all.